Soluble corn fiber. Should we be running the other direction as fast as we possibly can, or should we embrace that big giant corn on the cob with open arms and just enjoy everything about it? Let's break down soluble corn fiber. Now we see soluble corn fiber in a lot of lower carb foods, a lot of processed foods, which can kind of skew how we look at it. You see, if we look at soluble corn fiber as an individual ingredient, we can kind of see that there's some benefits, but also some drawbacks. So we're gonna break them down and let you decide for yourself, but I have my kind of feelings about soluble corn fiber. We'll kind of get to that in a little bit. So the problem that we face is that soluble corn fiber is usually alongside a bunch of processed, just preservatives and things like that, which throws it into a little bit of a negative category. And the problem is when you look at soluble corn fiber, a lot of the benefits of it being a fiber end up getting washed away or canceled out by the fact that there's preservatives that would ultimately kill off any potential benefit you're getting from it in the first place. So a lot of it has to be taken in context, like where are you seeing soluble corn fiber? You know, a lot of these preservative-rich products, like they're just throwing it in there because they say, hey, we can drive the fiber value up and not really affect the taste or the sweetness. Anyhow, let's break it down a little bit more. After this video, do check out Thrive Market down below in the description. If you do like things that are like sweet now and then, low carb diet stuff that's fun, check them out. That way you can try and get stuff delivered right to your doorstep. They're an online membership-based grocery store. So if it comes down to things like keto chocolate, or if it comes down to like paleo cereal, stuff like that, they've got all that stuff. So I highly recommend them. There is a link down below in the description. Plus you can find Thomas approved items that I would say, yes, this is good, you should have this in your pantry. So anyhow, use that link down below, and big thank you to Thrive Market for the continued support on this channel so we can rock this content. Some of what we have to face with soluble corn fiber is questioning whether it's officially a fiber or not. And that's kind of the big question out there. It's called soluble corn fiber, but is it really a fiber? So what we have to do is we have to look at the 3 criteria that you officially have to meet in order to be considered a fiber. Okay, first of all, you cannot have an effect on the blood glucose or a very minimal effect on blood glucose. Secondly, no significant change in insulin should occur when you consume fiber. And third, it should have a demonstrable fermentation effect that is measurable by breath hydrogen. And what that means is, essentially, if it's really a fiber, it should ferment to a certain degree so that it elicits a measurable effect on what you exhale out. Now, we're not going to test this on end users. It's tested in all kinds of different research settings. The point is, it needs to break down, it needs to actually be a fiber that ferments in order to be considered a fiber. So does soluble corn fiber make that cut? Well, let's look at the research. The Journal of Insulin Resistance published a paper. It was relatively small, but took a look at 9 individuals that consumed 25 grams of soluble corn fiber per day. Okay, so when they consumed this, they measured their insulin, their glucose, and their breath hydrogen at 30 minutes, 60, 90, 120, 150, and 180 minutes. Okay, well, what was interesting is they did find after about 2.5 hours, there was a 3x increase in their breath hydrogen. Okay, as well as no significant change in their insulin and no significant change in their glucose. A 3x change in breath hydrogen actually shows a pretty significant demonstrable fermentation effect, which leads me to believe, okay, cool, like soluble corn fiber actually is a legit fiber. It's not affecting insulin, it's not affecting glucose, and heck, we're actually getting a fermentation like short chain fatty acid benefit. That is tremendous for the microbiome, which we'll touch on in a little bit. So this may sound like, hey, cool, Thomas is totally pro soluble corn fiber. Well, there's still drawbacks, right? Okay, we have to look at the fact that it's derived from corn, which is heavily genetically modified. But then it begs the question, first of all, the open question that's going to drive everybody nuts because there's no real solid answer. Are GMOs really bad? Does it really matter? How do we entertain this? Like, what's going on? But then we distill it even more and we find, okay, does GMO even matter if something is so processed? Soluble corn fiber is very, very processed in terms of how it's like concentrated. So if it goes through that much concentration and that much filtration and that much processing anyway, does the fact that it is derived originally from GMO corn even really matter? But let's talk about some other interesting research that found that soluble corn fiber actually has a benefit when it's tied in with other carbohydrates. This is pretty wild. This study was published in the journal Nutrients, and it was a little bit bigger. It took a look at 22 subjects, and initially they found the same results as the journal Insulin Resistance study. They found that, okay, cool, yeah, no change in insulin, no change in glucose, and demonstrable fermentation effect. But then they added another little wrench into the mix. They said, okay, what if it's co-ingested with regular carbohydrates? If we take soluble corn fiber and we put it in with some regular starches or anything like that, what happens? They found that it lowered the insulin and glucose response of those carbohydrates that were being consumed. So consuming soluble corn fiber presumably, along with other carbohydrates, could make those other carbohydrates less negatively impactful. And what's cool about that is, like, we've done similar videos talking about allulose and how it has this benefit. So soluble corn fiber could be good to have in adjunct with like a cheat meal or anything like that. The issue is the bloating. We run into that. So coming back to a negative, if you're not adjusted to it, you could have a serious bloating effect. I know people that will go ahead and they'll dive into some soluble corn fiber chocolate and they're like, I could never have that. It doesn't agree with me. It's bloating the heck out of me. That doesn't necessarily mean you have a problem with it. That means that your gut biome isn't necessarily adjusted to it. So on that note, the gut microbiome, does it have an effect there? Well, the British Journal of Nutrition published a study that gave subjects 20 to 25 grams of soluble corn fiber for 7 days. On the 7th day, they took a stool sample and they found that they had a significant increase in short-chain fatty acid content. Okay, if you are trying to restore or at least expand and diversify your gut biome, you typically want to have higher amounts of short-chain fatty acids like acetate, butyrate, propionate, because these are anti-inflammatory, they are glucose regulators, they are fatty acid oxidators, they help you utilize nutrients. It basically signifies that you have a diverse biome. So it looks like soluble corn fiber does have a powerful effect there, which kind of couples into something that you might be wondering. If it's good for the microbiome, if it's good for this, if it's good for that, why isn't so many keto products and does it really work for that? Well, it's in a lot of keto products because it doesn't affect insulin and it doesn't affect glucose. So by my standards, it is absolutely okay on keto. The issue that we run into is a lot of times, once again, it's combined with sugar alcohols, and that could cause an issue. If you have soluble corn fiber alongside erythritol or soluble corn fiber alongside like a maltitol or something like that in a lot of processed foods, you're gonna have serious gastric upset, and that runs you into a big issue. But at the end of the day, it's still a very keto-friendly soluble corn fiber. It's a very friendly sweetener, so it does work for that. But here's another interesting thing surrounding the world of calcium. So if you're older and you're worried about osteoporosis, or you just are concerned about calcium in the first place, this is wild. So this study was published in the British Journal of Nutrition. It took a look at isotopically labeled calcium, okay, given to subjects, alongside 12 grams of soluble corn fiber for 3 weeks. Okay, here's what they found. They found that calcium absorption increased 12%. What the heck? What does soluble corn fiber have to do with calcium, right? Well, it turns out they were able to correlate that with an increase in the abundance of 4 specific species of bacteria. In case you didn't know, maybe I haven't beaten it into you enough, having a diverse microbiome is important for absorbing nutrients and minerals. So having an abundance of these particular bacteria actually increased how much calcium was absorbed. Okay, so soluble corn fiber, a sweetener that is in chocolates and things like that, literally was making calcium more absorbable because it diversified the microbiome and increased the abundance of a given species. That's pretty darn cool. So what is the general consensus here? I guess I'm going to go out on a limb and I'm going to say I think it gets thrown under the bus a lot because of some of the major brands. And I wanted to save this for the end of the video because I didn't want to open it up and just put a target on my back. But Kraft Foods had put a patent on some of the soluble corn fiber world. So what happens with that is by nature and by osmosis, it has become attracted to like these different like hyper palatable, not so good processed foods. Not saying that Kraft is necessarily bad. Kraft is making big leaps and bounds in the better for you space. We're getting into food technology and food science here, but the point is that translates into how things are marketed and how things are perceived. You may not realize it, but when Kraft is behind a lot of the promotion of soluble corn fiber within other foods, well, just by nature of the foods that it's in, we start to have this kind of disassociation with it, or we associate with bad things. So the point is, when in the right context, when by itself or with other things that are nutritious, it could actually be beneficial. Like if you had soluble corn fiber on broccoli, not that you would do that, it might not be a bad combination, right? So anyhow, as always, keep it locked in here on my channel. Don't be afraid of soluble corn fiber because it's not bad. Just watch where it is. See you tomorrow.